A couple of months ago, I was on Mike Horton's show, The White Horse Inn, and it was kind of an odd thing because what was happening was he was interviewing Michael Shermer on one segment, and then he wanted me to respond on another segment to the things that Michael Shermer had said, and so we had an interaction that way. It was faintly reminiscent of my 3-hour debate on Hugh Hewitt's show about a year and a half ago, end of December of 2009. That is, I think that's still available. But I had a long debate with Michael Shermer, and it was an interesting conversation. I've had Michael Shermer, by the way, is the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, probably the best known American atheist right now, and he's written quite a few books dealing with these the issue of the existence of God and how and why we believe what we believe. So I was listening to the show, and then after the show with Michael Shermer, then I responded. Many of you who listen to Mike Horton's program and the guys at the White Horse Inn probably have already heard this broadcast. I think it's already been done. But I took a lot of notes during the interview with Michael Shermer of what Michael said. Michael Shermer said, not Michael Horton. Mike Horton just asked a lot of questions, mostly. But there was something that he said that was very similar in kind, if you will, or subject matter, whatever, to something that he said at the very end of our 3-hour national radio debate. And at that time he said something along the lines of, there are lots of people who believe something totally different than what you do with just as much conviction as you believe. Which is true, by the way. In fact, there are people maybe that have more conviction than I do, more faith, if you will. And I think of certain Muslims or religious people of all stripes. And I think he was speaking of Muslims at the time, but it's entirely true. I may even have weaker conviction than a whole host of religious folk. But notice that the nature of our conversation was about what was true. Is it true that God exists, or is it true that he does not exist? Now, and this is where I'm reminded of the statement that I make whenever I teach or give the talk, Bad Arguments Against Religion. And I state there that it is axiomatic that very intelligent people make very foolish mistakes in thinking when it comes to spiritual things. I see this all over the place. And I think that Michael Shermer is a very intelligent person. And I'm not here to try to put him down or to try to beat up on him when he's not here to defend himself. But I mean, it came up. And he's public, he does radio shows, he writes books and these kinds of things. I think it's fair to raise the issue. But you think about this. Think about what he said. Well, there are lots of people who believe totally different things than you believe, and they believe them just as strongly as you believe. Now, you just think about that statement and then ask yourself the question, what does that fact, and it is a fact, it's a fact I do not dispute, what does that fact have to do with the question of whether God exists or he doesn't exist? How does that fact weigh in on one side or the other? How is it evidence for a view? Why would an atheist say that to me? Couldn't I just as easily say there are all kinds of people, Michael, who are not atheists and they have stronger convictions about God than you have about atheism? Therefore, what? Now I know what Michael intended. He intended to diminish the power or the force of the claims that I was making about God's existence. That's the point of his observation. But the observation doesn't do that. It may have rhetorical force. In fact, it does. And this is one of the reasons that I'm talking about this, because I think this is an intellectually undignified way to argue. And I don't want you to either use this kind of argument or to be taken in by it. It's more likely the latter in your case, because I suspect most of you share my convictions. But I would like to think that maybe in a clearer moment, Michael would think better of using that kind of approach. But it was the exact same thing I heard a year later when I was on Michael Horton's program, The White Horse Inn, and listened in on this interview that I would respond to the following hour. And here's the thing he said then. Equally intelligent people have equally strong claims on this issue. Equally intelligent people. Jews don't believe in Jesus. Muslims don't believe in Jesus, not the Jesus that we believe in. Are they all wrong? This is what he says. They don't believe what you believe. Are they all wrong? I'll tell you what I think about this question that he raised. I think that it's a standard question in his arsenal, and he repeats it everywhere he goes. He did it a year and a half ago with me. He did it in this interview with Michael Horton. And again, I'm not trying to pick on Michael Shermer. I'm just trying to get you to look at when the pressure's not on either of us. We're not under the gun, as it were. We're not in a crossfire. I just want you to think about that response. And if you're not a theist, and many atheists listen to this show, I'm glad that you do. I hope you see that this is not a helpful reflection. And if you offer it kind of as a knee-jerk response just to fill the noise of the moment to get people off your back, don't you at least be taken in by it, even if it stonewalls the Christian or the theist you're talking to. Don't you be taken in by this. Because Michael Shermer thinks that God doesn't exist. And so I could say, look, at equally intelligent people, Michael, believe that he does. They disagree with your claims. Are you saying they're all wrong? Well, the answer to that is yes. That's exactly what he's saying. And that's exactly what he should be saying if he's an atheist, or whatever view it is that he holds. If he thinks he's right, then other people who think opposite must be wrong. That's the way clear thinking works. So why should somebody be faulted for that in a conversation about these issues? This doesn't advance the conversation. It doesn't move it forward. It doesn't help anything. Equally intelligent people. All right. So what? We don't look at the people in these things. We're supposed to be looking at the arguments. We don't look at the strength of their convictions. We don't look at the power of their faith. We don't look how hard they pound the table or what sacrifices they're willing to make for the things they believe. We look at the ideas and see if the ideas have merit, regardless of how strongly people hold them or not. This is an example of the genetic fallacy. That is, that you fault an idea based on its genesis, the source from which it comes. That's just bad thinking. It's an informal fallacy. And it just mystifies me why people would fall for that. Or use it, I guess, is what really mystifies me. Someone who ought to know better. And one of his parting comments was, Muslims and Jews will look at the same data and say they don't believe it. Well, again, I don't know why that's relevant. This happens to all kinds of people. They look at the same data and don't believe God exists. Lots of people look at the same data that Michael offers and believe God does exist. Now what? It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not God exists. What you have to do is look at the data, not at the people who either accept it or reject it. And by the way, I have absolutely no confidence that it is true that Muslims and Jews will look at the same data. When you think of the kinds of things that Christians have offered in defense of the gospel, the resurrection of Christ, all of the details, all the kinds of things that we talk about here, And I know a lot of Christians don't know these things and don't use them. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the case we're able to present. This is the case that educated atheists like Michael Shermer have presented to them all the time because they do debates, so they have to field these challenges. And then they say Muslims and Jews will look at the same data? Does anybody really believe that Muslims are going around looking at the same data? And Jews are going around looking at the same data? I mean, once in a while they might look, but generally speaking, you think Jews and Muslims are examining the sophisticated data in support of the truthfulness of Christianity? No. They're not looking at any of that data. They're not interested in it. They're in their own thing. They're dismissive of it. They have their own commitments and their own convictions. I understand that. Michael wants to make it sound like everybody's looked at all the facts, and when they look at all the facts, then they all come to different conclusions. Therefore, there's nothing compelling about the facts themselves. That's the way it's offered. But I have no good reason to believe that all of these folks and all these religious traditions are looking at all of the same data and then coming to all their disparate conclusions. No, and Michael knows this because he wrote a book about it. Why people believe the things that they believe, it's because they believe what they believe because of what they're raised in. Indeed, that was the issue that came up in that interview, now that I think about it. There are socializing influences that are deeply influence the way people believe about things. I admit that entirely. I don't think it's ultimate. I think you can get outside of your social influences. Michael doesn't seem to think most people are able to do that, apparently, but he did. A whole host of other people did. Anybody who is believing differently now as an adult than they were raised did. Doesn't mean they're right now and wrong then or vice versa. It just means that the socializing influences are not ultimate. It is possible to rise above it and then assess the evidence on one's own and make one's own decision about it. So one has reasons personally for having convictions. They are not just socialized to views. But I do agree that most people are socialized. Most Muslims, most Jews are deeply socialized to believe what they believe. They do not believe what they believe because they've done a close analysis of the claims of Jesus of Nazareth from the primary source historical documentation. That's true of Christians too, which simply underscores my point that you can't look at the people, you can't look at their motives, you can't look at the circumstances which form those beliefs, you can't look at their cultures. You can't look at the strength of their conviction or the power of or the deep depth of their faith. That may be interesting if you're an anthropologist or a sociologist, but it has no bearing on the broader question of which religious claim is true. That must be determined on different separate grounds, and those grounds have to do with the belief itself, not anything to do with the believer. Well, okay, let's go to the calls. Shall we take a break? Yeah, let's just take why don't we just take an early break, and then I'll just jump in with Simeon in Fort Wayne and Joe in Santa Monica and whoever else is on board ready to talk with me here on Stand to Reason. Stay with us.